So I started to think, if we can put financial inclusion and banking on a mobile phone, how can we put legal services on a mobile phone? This was somewhere that we could really help. So these opportunities are all around us.
These will be the ones that are going to go first. It's the entry-level roles that can be performed by AI.
Of course, it does worry students. They're not going to replicate our experience.
How does someone actually get into the justice space? I want to have more of an impact. Where do you begin?
I would start by really understanding.
Welcome to Without Limitation. This is the podcast where we meet the people who are reshaping the legal industry. Now, I think anyone listening to this podcast probably agrees that AI is going to transform legal practice. But what if its impact could extend far beyond that? My guest today is Dr. Sarah Stevens. She is a trailblazer in the field of technology and access to justice. She started her career on a pretty traditional path. She worked for international law firms like Clifford Chance and Linklaters, but she's very passionate about the application of law for social change, and she transitioned from legal practice into international development with KPMG in East Africa, where she managed a portfolio of justice, education and economic growth programs. And her work continues to this day. Right now, she's focused on several initiatives. One is in Tanzania, where she is driving the development and rollout of an application called Dada Wakili. It's an AI tool that integrates with WhatsApp, and it helps those who need it, specifically women in Tanzania, to access legal advice that they otherwise would not be able to access. She's also active in education, and she runs the innovation program at the Sussex University School of Law, Politics and Sociology. Sarah's a really inspiring person, and I think if you are interested in AI and how it might go beyond legal practice and making law firms more efficient into having an impact in the wider world, whether you work for a firm, whether you work for a legal tech vendor or an in-house team, I think there's really great combination of inspiration here, but also some practical tips for how to take your skills and apply them to solve real-world problems. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you will too. And let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Dr. Sarah Stevens. She is the founder of Dada Wakili, the AI application for Tanzania. She's also an associate professor in legal innovation at Sussex University. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the discussion, we've got to acknowledge that we ended up at Sussex University at the weekend, didn't we? Mentoring a group of students for a hackathon. And we found out last night that they actually won, right?
Yes, yeah.
Despite our mentoring.
And not only did they win, they won the grand prize, like the overall winners. So they each went home with a drone worth £299. And the
So cool.
honour of winning the event. Yeah.
I think the honour is worth even more than the drone. And it was so cool. We were just saying before we came on, weren't we, how empowering it is for students to be able to build stuff. And this was a group who had never met each other before, didn't know how to, one of them knew how to build, three of them didn't. Yeah. And they built something really quite useful, actually, I think.
Yes. Yes, they did. They built a tool called LeaseMate, which is for students. They can upload their contracts from their private landlord, and it will review them, and it has red flags to tell them about things they need to worry about and how to articulate questions. And it looks great. And already they're saying, can they speak to the student union and get it added to, the website so that all students can have access to it?
Yeah, it's so exciting. And the number of ideas that were flying around at that hackathon and the energy there was just fantastic. And we'll come on to some of that later. Before we get into all of that, I wanted to actually start with your story, Sarah. And you started off in practice, right? So you qualified as a lawyer, but you've had such an interesting career since then, and these days involved in access to justice projects, both in the UK and in Tanzania. So maybe just briefly, can you tell us about that journey from corporate law and how you ended up with the stuff that you're doing today?
Yes. Oh, thanks, Matt. Well, yes, I did a training contract at Linklaters, so a big corporate giant. But before that, I had spent a summer at law school. I spent the summer in Kenya. volunteering on a grassroots access to justice project. And I really think that's where it all began. Sort of was very hands-on, working with street children or widows and people encountering these very, very life-limiting justice situations. And I guess that stayed with me. So then when I started my training contract and then became a commercial lawyer, I always did a bit of volunteering on the side with legal advice centres. And I think that stayed with me. So then through my corporate career from Linklaters to Kennedy's, there was always this thread of doing pro bono work on the side. And I ended up doing a master's in human rights law and took a case with Quorum Children's Rights Charity. We took a case to the Human Rights Court and won that. And that was kind of a real taste for social change and social justice work. So I think that thread has always been throughout my career, really.
It's so interesting. So it sounds like it really did start before or that summer after university. I think
Yes,
you're saying.
yeah.
When you were in Kenya. And that's actually kind of a common theme that runs through a lot of the discussions that I'm having on the podcast. People who have had non-traditional, you might say, career paths. And oftentimes it's those travels or those experiences after university. I had Richard Tromans on from Artificial Lawyer last week, and he actually had 10 years after university when he was traveling the world. And we were talking about how actually that breadth of experiences you get from travel and from doing things that perhaps aren't law necessarily or aren't directly in law really can give you such a broad range of perspectives that can then inform your work. And it sounds very much like that's been your experience as well, Sarah.
Yes, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, and even before I went to law school, I had a couple of gap years after uni, actually, and ended up as a paralegal for Clifford Chance in Shanghai at one point, as I was studying Mandarin at a university over there. So I think that there's that. And then I taught English in Tokyo for a bit. So I think you're right. I think all these life experiences give us lots of different perspectives. And actually, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but when it comes to technology and innovation and the way that legal services are going now, I think the wider life experience and our career experience is actually equips us better for the changing dynamic of legal practice nowadays.
I think that's right. And I was reading something the other day about how a lot of us refer to ourselves as nouns. I am a lawyer, I am a dentist, I am a doctor or whatever. And actually in the world that we find ourselves in now, where we can all do so many different things, partly with AI and technology, I think for a lot of us, and perhaps even more so for the next generation, this idea that you're not just a lawyer, you're someone who practices law, but you're also someone who builds products, you're someone who teaches, you're someone who does these things. Yeah. I think the days of us just being one thing, to me, that's really exciting. The opportunity to do more than one thing with your life and your career is a really positive thing.
Yes, it's always hard to articulate it though, isn't it? If in like the elevator pitch of what do you do? I always sort of pause and think, how do I answer that?
Well, I think for you, Sarah, it's probably harder than for most because you're doing about 57 different things, which we're going to come on to. So let's fast forward then. So you've talked about the early days in practice and the pivot and studying human rights law and then Tanzania. So there's this really strong link with your work and Tanzania. And in particular, you've been there just this last week or two, haven't you? Really launching a platform called Dada Wakili, which I wanted to really focus on in this discussion because I think it's so inspiring. Can you share a little bit more about what you're doing there? What is Dada Wakili and what work you're doing?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So just to sort of pick up from where I stopped, I then spent a sort of a decade in the city, and then we moved as a family. My husband got a posting overseas back to East Africa, where we'd both worked before, and I went in-house with KPMG in Tanzania. So that was sort of how I ended up there. And I was managing a portfolio of development projects and developing the justice portfolio. And really then again, seeing again how justice services hadn't really moved on from even 15 years before when I'd been in Kenya, and seeing how people were really struggling to know their rights and access their rights. And back in 2015, I don't know if you've heard of M-Pesa, but it's mobile money. And it was started in Kenya, and it was about financial inclusion on a mobile phone. It was sweeping across the continent. So I started to think, if we can put financial inclusion and banking on a mobile phone, how can we put legal services on a mobile phone? So started to build some very basic apps that would help you find a lawyer, that kind of thing. And so the Dada Wakili platform that you've talked about really grew from that. So messed about with different types of tech for a while, and then got a bit more serious about it around 2018 and started sort of designing what it could look like. And that interest then really just grew and became an obsession, still an obsession. I end up doing my PhD in technology and access to justice. And the use case was Tanzania, and looking at how do we build technology that really serves the underserved, and on a mobile phone platform.
And Sarah, could you just bring it to life a little bit, Dada Wakili? So who's it targeted at? You mentioned the underserved there.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about the users and the problems that they have, and how this technology helps to solve those problems for those underserved communities?
Yes. So a lot of part of the reason it's taken so long to build was that we did a lot of user research, a lot of field work and a lot of data collection to really understand, because there's very little justice mapping in Tanzania. So we really wanted to understand what are the priority issues that people are encountering in their daily lives. And the focus became women, because we found that there was quite a lot of discrimination in law for women, particularly around inheritance rights or violence, equal treatment at work, all those kind of issues, but particularly discriminating against women. So studied a lot about how women use technology, how women use their phones, what kind of searches they're doing, what kind of mobile phones they have as well. So really understanding their priority justice needs in their daily life. And then started to build out this tool, basically, an interactive chatbot on a mobile phone for women that guides them through the daily justice issues that they encounter.
And those justice issues, would you be able to give an example? So a woman in an underserved community. I think in the past you and I have talked about inheritance issues and estates and things like that. And there's a lack of ability with the way the systems are set up today for women to sometimes access the rights that they're entitled to. So could you maybe just share a little bit more about how that would work for somebody in one of those communities?
You're exactly right. And actually, that's sort of what triggered the tool, actually. So when I was volunteering in a grassroots advice clinic, we just saw over and over and over again women coming in saying, my husband's died, I've lost my home. Because what would happen is, just to complicate things a bit more, Tanzania has legal pluralism, has a pluralistic justice system. So 3 sources of law, which are statutory, religious, and customary. And they all interplay and govern clean inheritance. And so often when a spouse, the husband will die, the family will then claim family rights over the home, leaving the widow and the children destitute. And it happens all the time. But it's unconstitutional, and legislation has been passed that doesn't allow that to happen. But no one follows the statutory law. Everyone follows customary law. So this was somewhere that we could really help. We could tell them what their rights actually are in law, that they are now protected, and the steps that they had to take to protect themselves. It's like simple things like that. It's just simple sort of public legal education, and things around marriage. If the marriage takes place in a customary setting, often it isn't registered. If it's not registered, then there aren't the same rights and protections for a woman because the marriage isn't registered. So register a marriage. It was interesting when we were doing the field work, some of the older ladies in the focus groups were telling the younger ladies, you mustn't register your marriage, otherwise you have no rights. So it's kind of like this really community education and awareness. And we were just really tapping into that in a digital platform, building a tool that they could then access and ask these questions to and find out about their rights.
And remind me what the name means. Dada Wakili, what does it mean?
Yeah, you're right. You said it right, which is very good. Well, the Dada, it's almost misleading, but Dada in Swahili means sister. It's like an affectionate term, but it's a trusted term. Wakili means lawyer. So when you combine them together in Swahili, it means like a trusted friend, a learned friend that knows about the law, basically. So the name has been quite catchy and has taken off quite a bit.
And these communities are often very remote and rural and with limited access to technology, or even sometimes, I think you told me recently, even sometimes a phone of any description.
Yes. We work We work with both sets of communities, actually. So urban women in cities who do have smartphones and are more familiar with AI and using WhatsApp. So they're much more fluent in using the tool. And we're also starting now to do more outreach into more rural parts of Tanzania where they maybe don't have a smartphone. They only have one of those sort of old-fashioned phones that we all used to have at the start.
So there's a term that gets thrown around a lot in, I mostly work with people who are in big law, large law firms and corporate legal departments. And the term access to justice gets thrown around quite a bit.
Yeah.
My feeling is it might be one of those terms where it might mean 5 different things to 5 different.
Yeah.
At the risk of putting you on the spot, would you define something like Dada Wakili as an access to justice project? And how would you actually define that term? What does it really mean?
It's a huge term, and you've really hit the nail on the head. You can break it down to what is justice, and then justice is sort of culturally defined as well. So that was one of the focus groups we did in Tanzania. How do Tanzanians define justice? How do we define justice in the UK? It's a socially sort of defined term. And then access to it, access to what? And in the UK, we tend to think of the rule of law. Access to a court, access to advice, access to an enforceable remedy. But if you're working in a system where there's customary justice, it's not access to a court, it's access to a resolution or an outcome. So it is complex. There's not any one meaning, but in the work that I'm doing, I look at it in the terms of access to information, access to being able to make a decision based on that information and being able to act on it and hopefully get an outcome, but that's not always guaranteed. I also frame it a bit more around legal empowerment as well, and someone's individual capability to act on the information that they've received. So, but it is a term that's used very loosely, or overused, I think.
And I wonder almost if it's become slightly unhelpful.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those terms where it gets thrown around and no one's going to kind of put up their hand and say, well, what do you actually mean by access to justice in whatever context you're talking about? It's at risk of becoming almost academic as a term. I work in access to justice. I love what you said about legal empowerment. And I just wonder if perhaps there's an opportunity for me, it comes to life when you share projects like Dada Wakili and tools like that, because people understand the story behind it. Okay, there's somebody who has no access to something that they are legally entitled to, an estate or whatever it may be, and here's a tool that helps them to access that. They access to the legal rights that they already have, that they either don't know they have or that they are unable to access. But it just feels like the term itself is at risk of not meaning anything, and we almost need to, as a community, share more examples of this kind of work. Because then it really comes to life, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, in the UK, I sit on the board of the Access to Justice Foundation, and we make it very clear that it's a complex intersectional problem that's caused by policy, it's caused by lack of funding, it's caused by poverty, and the lack of access to justice is not just one thing. It's a web. And so, I agree with you. I think it's about sort of maybe just breaking it down a bit more. And I do get quite frustrated when we hear, AI is going to solve the access to justice crisis. I mean, it may help us build more useful tools, but the problem's intersectional and really complex.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually. So what role do you think AI can play, but also what are its limits? You're talking about some of the intersectional stuff there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, here in the UK perhaps, or in an economy like the UK or the US where there'll be people listening as well. In my mind, tools like ChatGPT and some of the consumer chatbots are starting to level the playing field a little bit, in that people, without necessarily having to go and pay an expensive lawyer, can get some guidance. Now, we can sit here and debate whether the guidance is going to always be right, and hallucinations and all and should ChatGPT be giving legal advice. But in my opinion, more often than not, and I really want to get your view on this as well, more often than not, it can help to level the playing field, and it's going to get better.
I think, you've touched on it. And so I've just been working with Citizens Advice actually in Sussex, mapping out sort of how can it, and the question was, how can AI help them improve their services and therefore reach more people? So we were looking at workflow as well, where AI can help in that sense. And we were looking at direct to consumer where it can help triaging and people seeking. So, and there, as you've said, there are obvious use cases there and people talk about them a lot. How do we manage the opportunity that it presents and still safeguard users? And I think we're seeing I think where it can't help is when it's people just think, oh, I'm going to build a tool and go off and put a wrapper on a foundational large language model and say, I've built this tool. And people who don't know that that's what you've done start using it. And that's really risky. So I think that's where it really doesn't help. I do think we need to have more transparency in how things have been built and tested.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it becomes really reckless.
I think also and from a design perspective as well, I mean, your project there, Dada Wakili, I would imagine that has thrown up some really interesting design challenges because almost by definition, the target audience for some of these applications, let's call them legal empowerment applications, by definition, they may find it more difficult to access some of the tools that others are able to access. So, they don't have access to a smartphone or perhaps a phone at all. Or they speak a language that is not a commonly supported language by some of big tech and those kind of things. So with Dada Wakili, I assume you almost had to design with all of that in mind. It can't be an application that requires lots of data and thousands of buttons. And maybe you can just share a little bit about how you designed with those constraints in mind.
Yeah. And I have to say that I have an absolutely amazing Tanzanian team. So the point is that I'm sort of have facilitated this, but I have really got this amazing team around me, a Tanzanian AI engineer, Tanzanian lawyers, Tanzanian partners. And so it's, in terms of the design, it's been very much led by the people we're trying to serve and the organizations we work with. So, but there are constraints like the laws. Many of the laws are not in Swahili yet. They're still in English because they're from the time when Tanzania was a protectorate. So the training model has struggled with that a bit because some data's in Tanzanian, Swahili, and some is in English. And so sometimes it can't remember which language to stick to. So things like that getting the data has been, for the training, has been quite that's a constraint. And then of course the compute power and the servers, and because it's free to the people that use it. So I'm trying to do everything open source and keep all our overheads down as low as possible and keep it as light as possible.
And Sarah, how is it funded? Because you talked there about, we need to keep the costs as low as possible. Can you say a little bit more about how you've managed to get, because these things do cost money to build and to maintain and to support.
Yeah, I mean, it started off as my PhD project. So I had a bit of research funding and that covered the first bit. And we built it about 3 times. We're on our 3rd build. So we keep taking out things that we don't think work very well and things that could be done lighter. And then now we've got a bit more traction and more support. We've been funded by, we've had some funding from the Irish Embassy in Tanzania. And we've just got some funding from the FCDO in Tanzania as well. So yeah, at the moment it's grant funded, but the business model is the biggest challenge, the sustainability model. And I think that's the same with all of these tools that are seeking to sort of serve an underserved community that can't afford to pay. The business model is the hardest nut to crack. I mean, you can build, I'm sure lots of people listening to this have built different things, but actually making it viable and sustainable. And it's the same in the UK in the access to justice space. How do you make a tool self-sustaining?
Yeah. That makes sense, and such different challenges to the ones that legal tech vendors face. You see some of the funding rounds right now and $11 billion valuations, and it's just a different world.
Yeah.
And I think it would just be great to try and bring those worlds together in some way. So, maybe if there are people listening, we'll come on to, how to get involved and support some of these initiatives, because I think there's so much talent out there and so much money in the world of legal tech that, it could all be going towards having a bit more of an impact.
Just to add to that as well, we would love to work with, there are any law firms or legal tech out there that are thinking, we would love to work with any big tech or anyone else that would be interested in sort of supporting us, because we've also got so much opportunity to scale and grow. We've been invited to go to other countries and launch there, but we just don't have capacity.
Yeah. Okay, well, there we have the call to action. Law firms and corporate legal teams or legal tech vendors reach out to Sarah and support her fantastic work. You're on LinkedIn, right, Sarah? If people want
Yes.
to connect with you on there, is that the best way to?
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about another initiative you're involved in here in the UK, which is the Online Procedure Rules Committee.
Yeah.
Bit of a mouthful. What actually is that? What is the Online Procedure Rules Committee, and what are you involved in there?
Yes, yes. So it was formed under statute in 2023 to provide the rules for the online court system. So if you think back to your law school days, we have the CPR and the white that governs civil procedure. So the online it's another rule committee essentially that will write the rules for online courts.
Got it.
So my role is I'm one of the experts on the panel appointed by the Lord Chancellor. There's 6 of us to convene and to convene subcommittees to help with different pieces of the work that involves.
And your work, am I right in thinking, is primarily around the inclusion framework and the legal empowerment? Maybe not that term, but it seems like the thread that runs through a lot of your work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what is that, the inclusion framework as part of these rules?
Yes. No. So as a committee, when we started meeting, we felt that the foundation upon which the online procedure rules should be based is inclusion, so that a digital justice system doesn't exclude the most vulnerable or those that would struggle to use it. But the purpose of the OPRC being to increase access to justice. So at the heart of that is an inclusion framework that provides principles and guidelines for legal tech builders, for all the stakeholders in the digital justice ecosystem. It provides a sort of a framework of principles to which they should comply to provide services in this space. Because a lot of the services are pre-court, so they're early dispute resolution tools, so online self-help tools, but also online dispute resolution.
Got it.
And the vision is that it provides this end-to-end flow of data so that someone could take advice pre-action and through an API and through common data standards would then pass all the way through to the court system.
And I think I've read that the rules are something like only 9 pages. Is that right?
Yeah.
And is that by design, or is that there's more to write?
Both.
Bit of both, yeah.
But that's what the inclusion framework is about. And and the Master of the Rolls is really trailblazing in this, in that we don't want to reproduce the white book. For lawyers out there, we know what that's like. This heavy tome of civil procedure rules, and actually to do something totally different, to have light, understandable rules that people can understand.
Do you think 9 pages? I'm not sure I can get through 9 pages with my attention span these days.
Yeah.
Is there work that you're planning in terms of bringing these rules to life in a more interactive way, or the sort of Instagram, TikTok generation, bringing them to life for that audience?
That's a really interesting question. I think certainly in terms of bringing them to life in the online court architecture, in that they'll be built in, they'll be embedded. So it won't be something sort of separate like a tick list, but it will just be built into the infrastructure of the online courts. But I think you also mean in terms of how can people read them and understand them. We haven't got to that stage yet, but that's really good suggestions. I'll take that on board, feed it back. We're still at the stage of, still actually quite early stage of what should be in the rules, how is it going to look?
And it sounds like perhaps people may not need to always read the rules so much as they're just embedded in the architecture of the system that they're interacting with.
Yeah.
So they'll just be running in the background and yeah. And what does success look like here? So when we talk about online procedures, we're talking about, perhaps a dispute or a claim that's going to be run virtually through Zoom or Teams. Am I understanding that correctly, or am I massively oversimplifying?
I think you've got the essence of it, but I think it's probably not Zoom or Teams. I think the HMCTS are building sort of the online court architecture. So I think it will look, it'll have to govern things like service of evidence, sort of exchange of documents. So it'll be more than just taking the existing system and putting it onto Zoom. I think that's what happened in COVID, really. It's an emergency response to COVID. So I think it will be different to that. But I think on your question of what success looks like, I think success is hopefully that more cases are resolved earlier. So don't actually, people can resolve. It's a user-centered justice system built around people's behaviours now and expectations now. Which I think I think a lot of gains will be for SMEs who can hopefully resolve their disputes more quickly and efficiently online and have that early dispute resolution without having to go through the whole court system.
I wanted to, we're going to run out of time inevitably with so many things to talk about. But the other thing that you're doing, obviously, Sarah, is your work at the University of Sussex.
Yeah.
And leading the innovation side of things in the law school there. Can you talk a little bit more about your role there and also how you're thinking about the future of the profession and the skills that your students are going to need? Because, there's a lot of talk in the news at the moment about what's AI going to do to the economy. And typically it's the junior roles that are the ones that everybody's talking about and saying these will be the ones that are going to go first. It's the entry level roles that can be performed by AI. Is that something that's coming up in conversations that you're having, in the corridors with the students? And how's that playing out on the ground?
Yes, thank you. I mean, of course it does worry students. And I think as well, these are 18, 19-year-olds who have grown up during sort of 2 years of COVID when they're all learning school, doing their A-levels in their bedrooms and things. So this is a generation that think everything should be online anyway. So they've got lots of sort of tech literacy. And so where all of us are sort of a bit older who've done traditional training contracts are thinking, how are they going to repeat that? They're not going to replicate our experience, and so I think we need to just sort of really, I think as practitioners and as educators, just kind of speed up a bit and recognizing that and thinking, we are in the digital age and students need different skills. Lawyers need different skills. And so this is why at Sussex we set up the Centre for Law and Technology to really equip this next generation with the skills that they need for the future of law. So a lot of, we teach classes like AI and the future of law innovation and technology, lots of different courses like that. And then, of course, now we're sort of getting more into the fun stuff around building. And as we saw this weekend, they're picking it up really quickly and really running with it. So I think it still always comes down to the individual sort of willingness it's that who's proactively going to look for the opportunities and grab them. I think that's how it's always been, really.
Yeah. As you know, I'm very pro vibe coding in general. And I think particularly for students and even, to be honest, kids in schools, I'm starting to think about making some kind of a vibe coding course for my school that my 7-year-old goes to.
Yeah.
Because I learned that at their school, they've spent the first half of the term in their IT lessons learning how to log in. And I was like, come on, don't start with login. I know we, frankly, probably won't even have passwords in 15 years' time. It'll be biometrics or something. It'll be embedded in our brain probably in some way. But also, there's so much potential for this technology to unleash creativity in people, as we saw this weekend.
Yeah.
I would start with, let's teach them how to build a game when they're 7.
Yeah.
In one lesson, get them excited about it.
Yeah.
For my son, it would be something to do with exploding toilets because, he's at the age of everything is jokes about toilets. But, I think for law students as well, there's such an opportunity to unleash creativity. And I think we all need to learn how to build, not because we're all necessarily going to be software developers, but because it's the best way to learn how the tech actually works.
Yes.
And as we saw this weekend, people can actually solve problems. The group that won are going to go to the student union, hopefully, and pitch the idea that these legal document leases from landlords go through an AI review and look out for any terms that are unreasonable or nasty. And that's potentially a great thing for the students as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm of the view that we should all learn how to build things. And the barriers to entry are lower than ever.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this as well. I also think we should teach AI critical literacy as well, so that they really learn how to critique AI as well. So, thinking about what type of data was this trained on, what biases are in it, what are the risks around it as well. So it's not all, and the environmental impact. A lot of students are still concerned, are rightly concerned about that. I know, and we had a class debate last week because one student didn't we were looking at AI tools, and one student didn't want to use the tools because she refuses to use generative AI because of the environmental impact. So we then looked into like the cost. OECD had done a report on the amount of water it was used to train GPT 3.5. And you've got all these foundation models that are being trained all the time, and the environmental costs. So students are really aware of that as well. So I think that sort of a literacy. So they came up with this idea that every tool that's built should have an environmental statement on it, saying how much water it's using every time you put in a search, or how much it's costing, which is right, actually.
Yeah, and it's actually very doable, I think. I'm surprised that, well, I'm not surprised, but the Frontier Labs, the OpenAIs and Anthropics actually will have relatively easy ways to get to that data directly or indirectly, or at least very in broad brush terms. They give you these beautiful dashboards on how many tokens you've used and queries this month and volumes and traces and all the rest of it. But there's actually no reporting, at least that I've seen, and anyone listening, feel free to correct me on this. There's nothing in there in terms of an environmental dashboard.
Yeah.
I might put it in the show notes, actually. I have come across a couple of tools recently that allow you to offset your AI searches. So like carbon offset your AI searches. So you can specify how much you use these AI tools, and then it suggests a carbon offset, which I think is interesting.
And particularly for when we talk about student education, our students are really concerned about that,
Yeah.
from that age.
The worry, sorry, yeah, I mean, the worry is that will the open AIs, or will even the legal tech companies be inclined to take action on these things and offer more visibility unless it comes from the buyers? And I actually personally think we need to see the law firms and the buyers of tech make this a mandatory requirement. I've seen it in some industry standards starting to pop up, but it's pretty loose at the moment. Everybody's worried about hallucinations and how those can be overcome, but less about the environmental impact. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if more can be done there. Last couple of things, Sarah, you're launching a lab, because obviously you don't have enough things going on that we've just discussed. So tell us about the.
Well, I'm hoping you're going to help me with this, so I'm delegating.
Yeah, count me in. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm in.
Yeah, so it's Sussex AI Law Lab. So I mentioned at the university we have the Centre for Law and Technology, which is sort of like the big centre, but we found that we need something a bit more agile, where we can get students in, we can do vibe coding, we can do some design, and I think what we'll do is so like I said, I've been working quite a bit with Citizens Advice, so we'll get some real use cases, because we also have legal clinics at the university, real use cases that where people are struggling either in their workflow or in the direct to consumer, and start building things.
And where next for Dada Wakili? You were over there last week. You were on the national news, if I remember correctly.
I was on the 10 o'clock news.
I wasn't tuned in, unfortunately. I missed that one. But yeah, what's next for Dada Wakili?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we're really at a crossroads now, actually. So last week was a really big week for us. We were at the Legal Tech for Access to Justice East Africa conference, and we got lots of support and lots of new partners, and some more funding. So we're now going from just being on smartphones to now being on we call them handheld phones. Those old Nokia phones that we all used to have.
Feature phones,
US
aren't they?
feature phones, yes. On USSD or SMS. So that we can go into more remote parts of Tanzania to help communities access legal information through a handheld phone.
Is it something that could extend beyond Tanzania, do you think? You mentioned M-Pesa earlier on. And I believe that spread across Africa.
Yeah.
It started perhaps in Kenya and it went broader, but
same
sort of thing in mind for this?
Yeah, that's our vision. And we have, like I said, we've had a couple of partners in other countries saying to us, when are you coming here? And we would love to do that. We're just constrained by our own resources at the moment, but that's the vision, if it's useful to let it scale.
Okay, well then another shout out to those listening who may be inclined to support this. That would obviously help to scale it even faster and have an even bigger impact. The last question I had, Sarah, was obviously I've spoken to a lot of people on this podcast who followed, you might call, non-traditional career paths. Is there a version of Sarah out there who stayed at Linklaters and practiced law, and any regrets there in terms of following this non-traditional path? And what motivates you today to do the work that you're doing?
I think I was always creative and always thinking outside the box, and I found that traditional pathway too linear. And I think now we have much more freedom. I think lawyers nowadays perhaps have much more freedom. And I think I certainly just wanted to solve problems. I just wanted to work in the justice space. And trying to solve some of these justice problems, and technology provides us a very good tool for doing that.
How does someone actually get in? Sorry, I said that was the last question. I'm asking another one. This will be the last one. How does someone actually get into the justice space? They're listening to this, they're inspired by it. Obviously, they can support Dada Wakili, but maybe they're in the US or they're in the UK, and there are citizens advice bureaus and things like that. Where would you, if you were advising somebody on just where do you start? I want to have more of an impact. Where do you begin?
I would start by really understanding the problem and really loving the problem, not the tech. Although we do love the tech, but in the justice space, it's really about solving the problem. And so I would start with volunteering at a legal advice centre and just really understanding the problems that people are encountering in their daily lives. And that's the hard slog, in a sense. There's no shortcut. This is sort of, you have to really understand what it looks like if you don't know your rights and what some of those experiences are. So, for example, I was at the food bank, and people go to the food bank with legal problems, because they need food because they haven't got a job. They haven't got a job because they had an accident at work. Legal problems are complex and layered. So I think it's really about understanding the problem. But again, the food bank's a really good example, because they said to me, we need some sort of tool to help us help our people coming to see us. So these opportunities are all around us, but you do have to get stuck in. We can't sit at our desks just building tech. We have to get out there and be with people.
Fantastic advice. And Sarah, thank you so much for your time. I hope this interview wasn't as challenging as the Tanzanian 10 o'clock news. But really fantastic stuff. I think a lot of people will be inspired by this, and hopefully you'll have some people reach out on LinkedIn to get involved in Dada Wakili or some of these other initiatives. And yeah, what a story. And I'm sure everyone will be looking forward to seeing where you take this next. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sarah.